And as I said, our hotel was featured in Yahoo News. I didn't know this until later, but you know, we were known as a major site where people were coming needing medical care. And we were near the French embassy and some of these other embassies, and so all these dignitaries were being evacuated. But it's like, could you throw out some Advil out the window or something, you know, some gauze or something? I mean, here we are working around the clock with bed sheets, and we need some basic medical supplies.